Hello everyone, welcome to our last video lecture of the term. So today I'm going to work through some arguments using both the long and short truth table methods. I might skip the long table on one or two of these. I just made these arguments up just before creating this video. I don't have a natural language version of these arguments. I've just cut straight to the symbolic form. So I've got a symbolic representation of an argument pattern. I've got 5 different examples we'll try to work through here. I'll probably work fairly quickly in the video just to go through a number of examples. I'm here more or less assuming you've gone through and understood everything else we've done so far. So I've tried to make these examples more complicated. I think they all have brackets and multiple operators. And to be perfectly honest, I'm not sure yet if all of these arguments are valid or invalid. I'm in cooking some of them up. Usually as I'm doing that, I can sort of easily in my head follow whether or not it's going to be valid or not. There's at least a couple here I'm not sure yet. So I'm, in a sense, I'm testing myself here and trying to show you what we should be doing. So I might skip the long truth table in some cases if I've got so many different simple statements that I have a huge number of rows. So one thing I will tell you on the exam, don't expect to have to produce 128 rows or even 64 rows. 32 rows on a long truth table is probably the longest thing I'm going to throw at you. So taking a look here, like I said, we don't have a natural language form of the argument, but what do we have? Well, we've got the first premise is really, it's an implication statement, and as the antecedent, we have a biconditional statement. So we're being told in premise 1, if the biconditional statement, P, if and only if Q is true, then it must be the case that R is also true. That's how we read that one. Because of course, the implication statement, whatever the operator is outside of any brackets, that's the operator really governing the whole expression. And then it's taking whatever is within brackets here as one of the things it's trying to connect. So the biconditional statement, P, if and only if Q, acts as our antecedent, R is the consequent. And the second premise, we have a disjunction. Either R is true or S is true. Third premise just tells us S is true. And then the conclusion is another disjunction. The conclusion is telling us either P or R or both P and R are true. Now, if we look back through the rest of the argument, just looking really quickly, we see we have R or S in the second premise. And then we've got S in the third premise. Where does P show up? Well, P is back up in the first premise, then we also have Q and R there. So, is this argument valid or not? Well, it will be valid if that conclusion is guaranteed by the truth of the premises. So if those premises taken together guarantee that either P or R or both of them are true, then the conclusion is going to be true as well. But just from looking at this argument, it's a little hard to tell if we actually have that kind of guaranteed information here. So let's make a truth table and find out if the argument's valid. So first thing we need to do is figure out how many simple statements we have. We've got P, Q, R, and S. So that's 4 simple statements. So let's just start with columns for that. And I'm going to just add to the truth table as I'm going along here. Try to talk out what I'm doing so at least we get some clarity that way. So what do we have? We've got P, we've got Q, we've got R, and we have S. Now, how many complex statements do we have? Well, looking through this here, and I'll just sort of put them in more or less in order. In that very first premise, we've got 2 complex statements. All right. So what do we have? Well, we've got the biconditional. I've got P biconditional Q. I'm just going to copy and paste my operator because that's easier than using the symbol insertion. I've then got the complex statement, P biconditional Q. If P biconditional Q, then R. I've also got 2 other complex statements here. I have R or S, and then as the conclusion, I have P or R. Make sure to label my various premises and conclusion in the header row here. And of course, I've got just the biconditional here on its own. It's not one of the premises, but that biconditional makes up part of this larger, more complex statement that's the first premise. So I have a column just for it, in part because I need to know whether or not that's true or false to figure out whether or not the more complex statement that takes the biconditional as the antecedent is true or false. Okay, so I've got a header row. How many columns or how many rows am I going to need in addition? Well, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 simple statements. We always have 2 to the power of n, so that's 2, 4, 8, 16 rows. Or 8, yeah, 16 rows. See? Even I have to think about it. So I'm just going to click and add. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Whoa, I don't know what I did there. Okay, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Okay, this one's going to be a bit of a pain. I'm pretty sure I have arguments later on that have even more simple statements. So we'll see if I actually do the long truth table for all of them. So filling it in, remember, we just do half true and half false in the first column. So I've got 16 rows, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 true, 8 false. Then when we move over, we have the number, we put it at a time and fill the rows. So instead of 8 true, 8 false, I've got 4 true, 4 false, 4 true, 4 false. Oh wait, something went wrong. What did I do wrong? 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 13, 14, 15. Ah, I've only got 15 rows. Well, that's my problem. Oh, that's no good. I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There. Okay, now I've got the right number of rows. You can't have a truth table with 15 rows in addition to the header row ever. You've done it wrong if you're doing a long truth table. So we've started with 8 true, 8 false. Now we've got 4 true, 4 false, 4 true, 4 false. We move over, we have the number of true and false we put in at a time. So instead of 4 at a time, it's just 2 at a time. And we alternate all the way down. And then we get to our final simple statement. We always alternate. It's always just true and false, true and false, true and false. Doesn't matter how many rows you have. You can have 1,024 rows. You're still going to have that. Okay. Now, our first complex statement, P biconditional Q. Remember, the biconditional tells us that either both of the things being connected are true or false at the same time. So the biconditional is only false if we have mixed truth values, right? If one of them's true and the other one's false, or vice versa, then the biconditional is false. As long as they're both true or both false, the biconditional is true. So to figure out what the biconditional truth value is, I'm going to look over to this column, and maybe I'll give it a little shading just for the moment, just to help show what I'm doing there. The biconditional column is going to be determined, right? Every cell here is true or false depending on the values in the row in the P and Q columns. So we've got both P and Q are true, so the biconditional is true, right? The biconditional is only false when they've got differing truth values. So just working through, let's see, both P and Q are true in these first 4 rows. Now P is true, well Q is false for 4 rows, so that's biconditional is false. Now P is false, well Q is true for 4 rows, so the biconditional is false. And in the last 4 rows, both P and Q are false and the biconditional is true, right? And in fact, just thinking about patterns, the biconditional, when we're looking just at simple statements, it's true half of the time, right? If it's taking simple statements as the things it's connecting. Okay, so that's done. So now I'll go ahead and fill in this column. So premise 1. Now to figure out whether or not premise 1 is true, I need to look at the antecedent column. And the antecedent of this complex implication statement, the antecedent is the biconditional statement on its own. So this is my antecedent column. In fact, I'll even write that in here just to show what I'm doing. And then what's I should spell it correctly. And then of course, the consequent is R. So I'm looking at this column. Now, one potential mistake to avoid when we were learning about implication statements, our antecedent was on the left and the consequent was on the right. So when we were looking at rows and trying to figure out when it was true or false, the implication statement's only false when the antecedent is true and the consequent is false. But of course here our columns are reversed. So in fact our antecedent is on the right and the consequent is on the left. So it's only when the truth value of the biconditional is true and then the truth value of R, the consequent, is false, that's when our implication statement's false. So it's not just a left-right issue, it's an issue of when the antecedent is true and the consequent is false, that's when the implication statement's false. So one thing that might trip you up. Okay, so I've just got to look through. As long as I don't see a situation where the antecedent is true and the consequent is false, this statement is true. So in the first couple of rows, the statement is true, right? Both of the statements are true. Here it's false. Why? Antecedent is true, consequent is false, so the implication statement's false. One thing to remember, whenever the antecedent is true, which it is in the next 8 rows, then an implication statement is always true. Right? Implication statement's always true when its antecedent is false. And then we see, just in these last 2 rows again, the implication statement's false. All right, so that's done. Get rid of the shading again. I hope the shading is being helpful. I'm just putting it in there for demonstrative purposes. You don't have to do this. All right, R or S. To figure out whether or not R or S is true, we go ahead and look at the relevant rows. Of course, the disjunction is true as long as one or both of them is true. Stated differently, the disjunction is only false when both disjuncts are false. So all I have to look for really is, are both R and S false? If they're both false, then this disjunction is false. So just working through, I see at least one of them is true and all of these rows. Oh, row 4, they're both false. And in fact, I've got a pattern here. So every 4th row, that statement is false. All right, we can see it here in row 4, row 8, row 12, row 16. Okay, so that's all filled in. I'll get rid of the shading again. Oh, pardon me. Okay, and then we've got one final implications or a disjunction to sort out. Our conclusion here, P or R. So we've got to look at the P column, and we've got to look at the R column. Realize I should also get rid of what my apologies. I also need to get rid of where I labeled consequent and antecedent. Those really shouldn't be in the truth table. That was just to show us what we're doing. Okay, so here again, just like with the last column, the disjunction's true as long as at least one of the disjuncts is true. So I just have to really find where they're both false. So just working down, I've got at least one of them is true in these first, 4, 6 rows, 8 rows, right, 10 rows. Ah, here we go. They're both false. Down here, I've got true, true, and then false, false again. So it was in these 2 rows and these 2 rows, I see that that disjunction's false because both disjuncts are false in those rows. Okay. Get rid of all this shading. Now what are we looking for? Well, we've got our table complete, so we want to look at only in the rows where the conclusion is false. Turns out we've only got 4 rows. Look at that. That's not too bad. We only have to actually care about 4 rows on this whole table. So we've got these 4 rows. Now we have to take a look at where the we're trying to find a row where all the premises are true and the conclusion's false. Now just taking a quick look, I'm looking at premise 2 first. Why? It's just really close to my conclusion row. It's right there. And I see that in at least 2 of those rows, premise 2 is false. So I don't have to care about the rest of those rows anymore. As long as I know one premise is false, I know that row can't show me invalidity. What I'm trying to find is a row where the conclusion's false. If all the premises are true, that shows me the argument's invalid, because in a valid argument, you just can't have that. If all the premises are true, the conclusion must be true as well. Right? Okay, so what about this row up here? Let's take a look. Well, I've got 2 true premises, pretty handy. Oh, look at that. This is an invalid argument. In this row right here, what is that? It's row what, 16, 15, 14, 13, 12, row 11. I've got a false conclusion, all true premises. That tells me this is an invalid argument. You know, if I look at these, look at this one other row that we had, well, in that row, I still have a false premise. So there's only one way in which this argument is invalid. There's only one row that shows us that. But that's enough, right? That's enough for us to conclude that this argument's invalid. See, in row 11, all the premises are true, the conclusion's false, so the argument's invalid. There we go, we're done. Okay, now let's do the short truth table method just for comparative purposes. Now I'm going to take a shortcut. I'm just going to copy and paste my header row because it's easy. And now if I think about it, oh, I want to get rid of the shading. So there, saved a bit of time, just copy and pasted the header row. Of course, if you're doing the short truth table method, you would just construct the header row the same way we did for the long truth table. The differences start, now that we're using the short method, we're not going to have to make all 16 rows. Really, what we're trying to do is just construct this row that shows us invalidity. That's what we want. So we have to set our conclusion to false. That's how we start the short truth table. That's right. We're trying to have a false conclusion on all true premises. So make the conclusion false. Now, of course, the conclusion is P or R. P or R can be only false in one way. Right? If the conclusion is false, that tells us both P is false and R is false. Right? Because the conclusion is a disjunction. It's telling us that one or the other or both of them are true. And so if we're saying the disjunction's false, we're really saying both of those are false. Because look, what if I said, you know, P is false while R is true? Well, then the disjunction would be true. Or the other way around, if I said P is true and R is false, the disjunction would be true. If they're both true, the disjunction is true. So by saying the disjunction is true, by starting there and saying the conclusion's false, that disjunction is false. That's what I want to see. I already know I've got the information to fill in the truth values for the simple statements P and R. And of course, if the disjunction were taking as disjunct something other than P and R, whatever those disjuncts were, I would know that I'd have to make them false, right? Those could be other complex statements, and then that might give me enough information to fill in some simple statement values as well. So whenever you've got enough information to fill in a value on a simple table, whenever your hand is forced, right, you have to fill in a certain value to be consistent, then do it. All right, so we filled that in. Now we need to try to make all our premises true or the conclusions false. Remember, we've got that sequence that we can work in. We'll start with simple statements that act as premises. In that case, that's P3, just the simple statement S is a premise. We can make that true. Have we contradicted ourselves? No. S hasn't shown up in anything else we've looked at yet, right? All we've dealt with is P and R and their disjunction. So we can make S true, no problem. Now, we've got this biconditional here, but it's not a premise. So we'll leave it for now. We'll also leave Q open for now, right? We're not sure what kind of value we want to assign there. We know we want to make the premises true. Any values beside the conclusion and the premises, we don't really care if they're true or false. All we care about is that our values are consistent the whole way along, so that we aren't contradicting ourselves. We aren't saying somewhere that Q is true and somewhere else in the same row we say it's false, or something like that. We need to make sure that in each row, if we've said some particular statement, whether it's simple or complex, is true or false, we're consistent about that for the whole row. Also, one other note, because of this disjunction, the conclusion's only false in one way. It's only false when both P and R are false, and there's only one way for P and R to be false. They're just false. We only have one row to make, right? We only have one shot at this. We only have one life, so to speak, one try, one attempt. So, and given in the long truth table, we already saw that this argument's invalid. We already know ahead of time we're going to be able to show it in this row. It's just a question of how are we going to do that. So now let's take a look. What are our other two premises? We have a disjunction. We also have an implication statement. Both of those sorts of statements can be true under different sorts of conditions, right? When we say that they're true, the parts that make them up might have differing truth values, but we don't have any negated simple statements to deal with. We don't have any conjunctions. We don't have any negated disjunctions or negated implication statements. Those were the rest of our, in the sort of steps I outlined in the short truth table. Those are, it's a good order to work in, because with those sorts of statements, you know when they're true, you've got one set of truth values you can then deal with. But for the statements we have here, the truth values can vary. We're not really sure. So let's start with P2, just because it's a little bit simpler than P1. So let's say the disjunction R or S, the second premise. We'll say that's true. So that's true as long as at least one of those is true. Look at that. We already know that S is true. That was premise 3. So as long as S is true, and we've said it's true, it turns out the disjunction R or S is true, right? And so if we look back at R or S, at least one of them's true, so the disjunction's true. So we haven't contradicted ourselves by saying premise 2 is true. So far, so good. What about premise 1? We want that to be true. Can we make it true? Well, let's see. I'm saying premise 1 is true. Under what conditions is this true? Well, it's true as long as it's just not the case that the antecedent is true while the consequent is false. Now, the consequent is false here, right? R is false. We already know that from what we did back when we initially set the conclusion to false. So we have a false consequent. So we would contradict ourselves if we said the antecedent of the statement is true, right? If we said this was true, we'd have a problem on our hands, because by saying premise 1 is true, we're saying it can't be the case that the biconditional is true while the consequent is false. So to avoid that problem, we have to say the biconditional is false. As long as the antecedent is false, the implication statement is true. So taking a look at this, we're saying P if and only if Q is false. When is that statement false? When P and Q have differing truth values. We've already made P true or P false. So to be consistent in saying that the biconditional is false, we have to say Q is true. Can we do that without contradiction? Yeah, we had this value left open, right? We never had to assign Q a truth value until this point. Now we need to, so that we can consistently say the biconditional is false, right? We already set P to false, so we need Q to be true, and we need to make sure that doesn't contradict ourselves anywhere else, but it doesn't. And now if we look through, what do we have here, right? We've got our false conclusion. There it is. We've got all true premises. All right, let's take a look at that. And in constructing the row, we just never had a situation where we had to contradict ourselves, where we had to say the same thing was both true and false at the same time. And now if we actually look, I'm just going to get rid of the argument here for a second so it's easier to get it on one screen. What have we actually made here in the short truth table? We constructed from scratch the row on the long truth table that showed us invalidity, right? Look at it. We had the same header row, so the columns are all in the same order. And what do we have here? We've got false, right? In both of these rows, from left to right, we have false, true, false, true, false, true, true, false, right? All three of our premises are true, conclusion's false. All the other values line up. All the other values really only mattered insofar as they helped inform what the premises and conclusion were. So here again, right, we can conclude this argument is invalid. Conclusion can be false while all the premises are true without contradicting are true. There is no contradiction in the row. And we can express that in somewhat different ways, but you know, I could talk about it a little bit differently. You know, all the premises are true, the conclusion's false, there's no contradiction or something like that. But this is really the idea, right? If we can have all the premises true and the conclusion's false, and we haven't cheated, we haven't contradicted ourselves, then the argument's invalid. If we just can't do that, we can't try to bend the truth values and fill in things the way we want to get all the premises true and the conclusion's false, then the argument is valid. Right? Okay, let's move on to our next one. So that took a little while, actually. I'm trying to time myself. I'm trying to get it a little bit better. That was 25 minutes. So what do we have here? Not O is the first premise. If D, then O. Second premise, D or S. Third premise, S as the conclusion. So this argument valid or not? Well, I can work through it quickly in my head, but why don't we make a truth table? Now this time we only have 3 simple statements. That's going to save us a little bit of time on the long table, right? We've got what, D, S, and O. Right? Why did I put them in that order? Well, look, I know I need a column for not O, and it's pretty handy if I have that column right next to the O column, just for the purposes of filling it in. That makes it a little bit easy. I've got if D, then O, and then I also need a column for our last complex statement, D or S, so that's our third premise, that's our second premise, this is our first premise, S is our conclusion. Okay, and I've got 3 simple statements, so I need 8 rows, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Hopefully I didn't mess that up again. A little shading. Fill in our simple statement truth values, and remember, you always start half and half. You know, you put in half as many as you go over, and then you wind up alternating. Right? You're always going to wind up alternating in the last simple statement. You always start by having half true, half false. Now, of course, the not O is just false when O is true, and not O is true and O is false, so that's pretty easy to fill in, right? Just whatever the opposite truth values were to O there. If D, then O. Only false when D is true, but O is false. So if I look through, look at that. Whenever D is false, I know the statement's true, and I've only got O false in rows 2 and 4. D or S, only false when they're both false. And if you look through, at least one of them is true in the first 6 rows, false in the last 2. All right, so I've got my table. That's all done. So now I need to look at only the rows where the conclusion, which is S, is false. So I've got 4 rows to look at. Need to look to see, are all the premises true in any of those rows? Well, I can knock out these 2 rows right away by seeing that P1 is false. Oh, look at that. P2 is false here. That's pretty nice. What else do I have? P3 is false in both of these rows. Hey, look at that. Right, that's really all I needed to do. I could fill in, right? I could use the green to fill in where the premises are true. But if I just take a look, I've got 4 rows where the conclusion is false. Rows 3, 4, 7, 8. In row 3, at least one premise is false. Row 4, at least one premise is false. Row 5, 2 premises are false. Row 6, I've got a false premise. See? Look at that. Argument is valid. In every row where the conclusion is false, at least one premise is false as well. Okay, now again, I'm just going to take a shortcut. I'm going to copy and paste my header row just to save time. All right, get rid of my shading here. So what am I going to do in the short truth table? Set the conclusion to false. That's how we start. So S is false. Of course, does that tell us anything else right away? Looking around, well, it doesn't tell us anything about the other simple statements. There's D or S over here, but of course, that can be true while S is false because it's a disjunction. So I don't actually have any more information yet. I can't fill in any more values on the truth table. Okay, so let's try to make all the premises true. Now, we don't have any premises that are just simple statements, so we can't start there. The next best thing is a premise that is a negated simple statement. If we make not O true, that tells us immediately that O has to be false to be consistent. Perfect. Okay. Now, looking at our other 2 premises, if you think back to that list, that order I give you in chapter 6, we don't have anything else on the list, so we're really just stuck making the rest of the premises true. So what do we have here? We've got if D then O, and we've got D or S. Do we have information that really tells us anything? Well, we've got O. We know O is false, right? We don't know whether or not D is true or false yet. We know O is false, so let's start with premise 2. We know the consequence false, and if the implication statement's true, we have to say that D is false, the antecedent's false. If we said D is true, we would have just contradicted ourselves, because we say if D is true, O must be true. We know O is false, so if we say D is true, we've got a contradiction on our hands. It can't be the case that all 3 things are true, that if D is true, O has to be true, O is false, and D is true, right? That's an inconsistent triad. You can't have all 3 of those. So we've got, something's got to give. In this case, we know O's got to be false. We know if D then O needs to be true for us to get what we want. So we have to admit D is false in this row. So now it's just a question, what about our very last value, D or S, that last premise? Can we say that's true without a contradiction? Right? I want to say that's true to show invalidity, but I just can't do it, right? Here again, I would contradict myself. If it's true, right, if premise 3 is true, if D or S is true, one of them is true, the other one is true, or both of them are true, and I look back at the columns for D and S, well, they're both false. So those can't both be false. Well, the premise is true. Right? Now, of course, I want that premise to be true, so maybe I go back and try to change one of these values. Right? You know, maybe, oh, I say D's true. If D was true, then premise 3 could be true. But of course, we just went through this. If D is true, then premise 2 can't be true. Right? Well, O is true. So maybe I could, right, try to say, oh, no. You know, premise 3 is true. That means I have to admit D is true. And if D is true, and premise 2 is true, that must mean O is true. And if O is true, then premise 1 would have to be false. Right? I hope I didn't just get confusing there. I'm just trying to show, for us to be consistent, even if we try to switch the values around, we wind up always having to admit that at least one of the premises is false. Right? We just have to. Unless we contradict ourselves, we just have to admit somewhere in here one of the premises is false. So look at that. And if we look back at our table up here, just get rid of the argument for the moment, right? If we look back at the table up here, what did we do? Oh, we constructed another row up on that truth table. What did we make? This time we made the very last row, right? Made the last row. Now, if we had done things differently, you know, and I was going through and just sort of flipping around some of the truth values, just trying different combinations of true premises to see if I could make them all consistent, given how the simple statements have to be true or false, I couldn't do it, right? So look, just going back to what I was doing, if I just say, no, I want premise 3 to be true, right? And if that's true, at least D has to be true, because I have to have S being false for me to get what I want here. So if S is false, and I want the disjunction D or S to be true, then D must be true. Of course, if D is true, and if D then O is true, then I have to admit that O is true. If I admit O is true, then not O is false, right? So here's another way I could have tried to fill in the values on my short table. What do I have again? Well, I still couldn't show the arguments invalid. I just couldn't make all the premises true or the conclusions false without a contradiction. And if we look back up at the long table, I guarantee you I've just made another row. I'm not sure which one yet. Let me take a look. I think it's this row. I think it's row 3. True, false, true, false, true, true. Yeah. So I can make row 3 instead, but guess what? I'm going to get the same thing. And if we really wanted to, we could make the other rows as well, right? We could try different combinations here. So look, what about this next row? We say the conclusion's false, right? We know we want that. But what if we started with these other premises? We say either D or S is true. And I know S is false, so D must be true. I say, I'll make premise 1 true now, and that means O is false. What am I left with? Well, if I look at if D, then O. D is true, well, O is false. Well, that has to be false too. There. I just constructed row 4 instead. Right, we can construct any row from the long table and the short table, but ultimately we're going to get the same results. Right? We're not going to get some new row in the short table that shows us something the long table didn't show. This is why the short table is powerful. Right? You've got to know what you're doing. You have to understand what you're doing in setting the truth values, how to set those values, how to maintain consistency across the row and what you're trying to do with it. But it can save you a lot of time because instead of making all these rows and all these cells, you can just make one row or a handful of rows instead. Okay, so that one's done, right? We've done it again. This argument is valid, right? And in this case, we would say, you know, this argument is valid. Argument is valid. The conclusion cannot be false. All the premises are true without contradiction occurring in the row. So let's move on to this next one. Oh no, what did I do? Carl. Whoa, okay, premise 1, not R and A. So it's false that both R and A are true, because of course the conjunction's saying they're both true. Premise 2, if A is true, then B or F is true. As long as A is true, then the disjunction of B or F is true. Premise 3, if F is false, then it must be true that either E or A and F. Conclusion, F or B or E. Oh, gross. What'd you do? This is a lot of stuff. Well, let's just take a moment to think about what's going on here. So in the first premise, we have a negated conjunction, right? So the negation comes right before the brackets. So what it's telling us is everything inside the brackets is false, right? It's telling us the expression inside the brackets is false. That expression is R and A. Now, R and A is true only when both R and A are true. So what the first premise is telling us is that it's just not the case that both R and A are true, right? Now, we don't know what the situation really is. We don't know if R is true and A is false, or R is false and A is true, or both R and A are false. We just know it's not the case that they're both true, right? That's what the negation is saying. It's false that both R and A are true. The second premise saying if A is true, right? And now the first premise, we're not sure. We know A and R can't both be true at the same time, but we're not sure if A is true yet. Now, in the second premise says if A is true, then what follows, the consequent, oh, I did a bad thing. My apologies. Right. The second premise here, if A is true, then, well, the consequent here is another bracketed unit. The consequent is the complex expression B or F. So if A is true, then B or F must be true. And of course, B or F is true when either or both of the disjuncts, B and F, are true. Third premise, if not B is true, or, if B is false, right? It's two ways of saying the same thing, then here's our consequent. Our consequent this time is an even more complex expression that itself has a complex expression embedded within a complex expression, right? Which is embedded within the complex expression that is the implication statement that makes up P3. So I've got a complex statement inside a complex statement inside a complex statement here. But I still figure out the truth values the same way. I've added more complexity, but I still have the tools to figure out how to handle this and figure out whether or not this argument's valid. Okay. So what do I have here? Well, so we've got the implication. It's telling us if not B is true, then this whole statement is true. How do I figure out what that statement is? Well, we look within the brackets. So within the outside set of brackets, right? We've got the round brackets, the parentheses out there. What's inside? What's the statement we're looking at? Well, this time, what's outside of the brackets, right? Within the round brackets, what's outside of the square brackets? A disjunction. What is that disjunction taking as disjuncts? What's it gluing together? What's it working on? What's it operating on? E on the one side, E is one disjunct. On the other side is a conjunction, A and F. So the consequent here, this complex expression, E or A and F, is telling us it's true that either E is true, A and F is true, or both E and A and F is true. And of course, that expression A and F, if we look inside the smallest set of brackets we have, those square brackets, we have a conjunction in the middle, we have A and F. So that expression is telling us A and F is true, right? That statement, A and F, is true only when both of the conjuncts are true. And then we've got our conclusion, which is a disjunction, right? And it takes as its disjuncts F on one side, and on the other side, B or E. So we have a disjunction that is connecting a disjunction on one side with a simple statement on another. Okay, let's think about our header row. How many columns do we need here? Let's see, I need one for every simple statement. So I need R, A, B, F, E. I think that's it. Let's just start making it and figure out B, F, E, and then with what do I have left? I've got B here, I've got E, A, F, F, B, E. Okay, so I've got 5. I've got 5 simple statements. Like everything's centered. How many more columns do I need for the complex statements? Let's see. Oh, a bunch. I need so many columns here. So just working through the premises. First premise, not R then A. So I need R and A. Then I need another column for, in fact, this might be made a little bit easier if I, what do I do this, layout. I'm going to orient my page landscape, make it wider, right? So I have more room to work with here. Okay, so R and A, maybe I'll center the argument as well, just so it's right there. I also need not R and A. So, and I put those right next to each other just to make it a little bit easier for me to figure out when not R then A is true. That's the one I really care about. Now, what's in premise 2? Well, I've got if A then B or F. So let's put B or F, because I'm going to need to know that. And then we'll put if A then B or F. That's premise 2. Okay, oh, now what do I have? Premise 3, if not B, then, okay, well, so I know I need not B here. I'm going to have that to figure it out. What else am I going to need? Oh, E or A and F. So I'm going to need something for A and F, because I don't already have a column for that. I'm going to need a column for E or A and F. In fact, let's start smushing these things together a little bit. Now I'm going to need another column for the whole expression, right? If not B, then either E or A and F. What else am I going to need? Oh, I've really got myself in a pickle here. I also need something for B or E. And then finally, well, I should label this as premise 3. And then finally, I want to need something for the conclusion, which is F or B or E. Well, B or E. Now, as I've mentioned in the past, whether or not you have a space between the various operators, it's more stylistic than anything. So I'm going to take out some of these spaces here just to help what I have going on fit in the space I've got. One other tip, if you're working in Word, if you double-click between the line on a column like this, it'll automatically resize that particular box to fit whatever's going on inside there. Makes it a little bit easier to work with. Okay, so here we go. I think I've got everything I need in this header row. Oh, should I even bother with a long truth table? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I've got 5 simple statements, which gives me, all right, if we're just thinking about 2 to the power of n, it's 2 to the power of 5. I've got 2, 4, 8, 16, 32 rows. Do I want to do that? How long has this video been? Apparently I'm at 43 minutes and I still have 1 or 2 examples to work through. I want to do it. I'll do this truth table just to show you how big and complicated it can get, and then we'll do the short version to see how we can make it better. So 1, 2. Okay, I think I've got 32 rows. Oh, it doesn't even fit on the page. Come on. All right. Now that I've already put the argument in the header row, conclusion, everything, I'm going to get rid of that. I'm going to sort of put it somewhere else so it's out of the way. I'll look at that, and it even spills off onto another page. Get this all on one page, almost sort of. Whew. Make smaller margins. There we go. Now I get the whole thing on one page. Make sure I've got 32 rows. 1, 2, 3, 4. Got 32. Okay. Cool. 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Whew. Okay, so 16 true, 16 false. Now we're going to go 8 and 8, right? One thing to keep in mind, even when you have a huge truth table, when you start alternating, if you just look, you can see sort of patterns nested within patterns. So we've got R all true, and then we've got A is true and half of that subset, A is false and half of that subset. And we're going to see the same pattern down here. So in the rest of the columns, when R is false, we've got, sorry, when R is false, and half of them A will be true, and then half of them A is going to be false. Of course, when we move over another row, we're going to cut in half again the number that we entered at a time. So instead of 8 true and 8 false, we're doing 4 at a time, 4 and 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? And look at that. We've got the same thing. Where A is true, right? We've got half true, half false. And then in the next bit, when A is false, we're going to have true, 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 false, 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 false. We've got this repeating pattern. We've got all false, and then true, 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 false, 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 false. And we're going to just wind up having that same pattern repeat itself over here as well. All right, so where it's all true, we've got sort of half true and half false next to it. Where it's all false, it's half true, half false. We have the number we enter at a time, so we're doing 4 at a time, 4 true, 4 false. So we're down to 2, 2 true, 2 false. And look at that. What do we have? We've got this small repeating pattern. True, true, false, false. Right? True, true, false, false. R. No R on a truth table. And then the very last column for a simple statement, we always have just true, false, true, false, true, false, true, false. Alternates the whole way down. Okay, I've got the simple statements done. Whew. Okay, maybe I won't give you a 32-row truth table to do on the exam. That's a lot, and it's a lot of space for a typo to creep in to get some sort of error in the table. But what do we have? Ultimately, we have the same thing we've always been seeing. Very first row, all the simple statements are true. Very last row, all of them are false. And every row in between is a different combination of true and false. If we look just working our way up, so in the last one, they're all false. We've got one of them's true. One of them's true, but it's a different one that's true, right? There's 2 of them that's true. A different one is true. 2 are true, but it's 2 different ones. 2 different ones are true again, right? The 3 are true, and so on. You can go through and you can actually see. You're never going to see the same thing twice. Okay, R and A. So to fill in that column, I need to be looking at these first 2 columns. So R and A is only true, and both R and A are true. Okay, and so I've only got it true up here in what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Right? First 8 rows. That's where they're both true before they start to have a pattern. So not R and A, of course, I just reversed the truth value. So all I have to care about now is what's going on in this column right beside it. And this is why I made the truth table this way. Right? So false, 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 false. So first 8 rows, it's false. And then it's just going to be true in the rest of the table because I just remember that the conjunction is false all throughout there. All right, B or F. Now I need to look at these 2 columns, right? As long as I see one or the other or both of them being true, I know the disjunction is true. Well, there, right? Here's where they're both false. And I bet I'm just going to have a pattern like that where I'm going to have a bunch of true and then 2 false in a row. You know, that's exactly what I'm seeing. Look at that. And given that we're dealing with simple statements here, again, it's a quarter of the time it's going to be false. So if I've got 32 rows, what do we have? We got 2 false, 4 false, 6 false, well, 6 false, 8 false. 8, 16, 24, 32. So 1 out of 4 times it's false. Oh, now this implication statement. If A, then B or F. So to figure that out, I've got to look at the A column and I've got to look at the B or F column. The implication's only false when the antecedent's true, right? When A is true, and the consequent is false. So look, whenever if I see the consequence true, right, and in these rows B or F is true, it doesn't matter whether or not the antecedent's true or false. I know that the statement's true, so I can just, without even having to look over at A, I can just fill that in. Here I see the consequent is false, so this is where I actually have to pay attention and go all the way over and look at A. Look at that, A is true, both those rows, well the consequent is false, so I know that's false. Here again, the consequent is always true, so I don't even have to look at A, I just know it's true. Here, consequent is false again. If I look over in the A column, what do I see? Oh, it's false, right? So if both the antecedent and consequent are false, statement is true. Consequent is false again. Here, consequent's true, right, in all those rows in the middle. So the implication is true. Here again, I've got antecedent is true, the consequent is false. That's going to be a situation where the implication statement is false. Consequent is true, so the statement is true, the implication is true. And here they're both false again, so true, true. Look at that. Now, because I'm connecting a simple statement with a disjunction here, the pattern that shows up is going to be more complicated. So I'm just not even going to mention what that pattern is going to be like. We know if these were just simple statements being connected by an implication, we'd see it false 1 out of 4 times, so it would be false 8 times again. Okay, not B. That's just true whenever B is false. So looking at the first, 4 rows, right? What's the B pattern? 4 true, 4 false. So the pattern here is going to be 4 false, 4 true. Oh, I made a mistake somewhere. I've got 3 spots left. So false, 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 false. So 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. There we go. That's all good. A and F. So I need to look in the A column and the F column. Right? And I've got to see when those are true or false. Oh boy. Make it a little bit easier on myself here by adding some shading. Okay, true, true, false, false, true, true, false, 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 false. Yep, true, true, and then going back to make sure I didn't actually make a mistake here. Because now we're getting into pretty complex territory. So A and F, both true, false, true, true. All right. True, false, true. So I know it's probably very exciting to watch me quietly look through the table. I'm hoping that you're looking along with me because I'm honestly trying to see if I made a mistake. That's, as I've mentioned before, that's really one of the hazards of a long truth table like this. You wind up having so much information on your hands, it's very easy to make a typo or sort of lose track of where you are. Another word of warning, I am almost certainly not going to give you something like this on the final. This is very complicated. Why am I going through it here? Just to show you some complicated examples. This is what we can build up to. So if you can follow along with what I'm doing here, you're in really good shape. You've got a good understanding of what's going on. Okay, so this column, E or A and F. So this is true if E is true or A and F is true, right? Or they're both true. So really all I'm looking for are rows now where those are both false. Okay, I've got at least one true. So what I'm going to do is look at the A and F row. As long as A and F is true, I know that this junction's true. Only when I see that A and F is false, am I going to take the time to look over to the left at the E column. All right, so here, now all of a sudden I've got this is false, so I have to look over. All right, what do I have? Well, I've got true and then false. So true in this row, right? Row 4, both of them are false, so the disjunction's false. Here I've got A and F is true again for 2 rows, so I'm just going to look here. Now I see that it's false for quite a while, so I'm going to look over here. All right. For that whole set of rows, I've got to look, and really what do I have? Whatever these values are over here. So just looking, so I've got true, false, true, false, true, false, true, false, true, false. And I've got true, true, because of course the conjunction's true again, and then what do I have? True, false, true, 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 false, true, false, true, false, true, false, true, false. Okay, hopefully I didn't make a mistake there. All right, we're almost done. Almost, we're getting there. And I just, if you didn't catch what just happened there, I just double clicked to expand the column again to get it to resize itself. So, not B, so this time I've got this column I'm working with, not B, then, oh, okay. It's what we were just doing here in this last one, so I don't have to look quite so far. So, what am I trying to look for? I'm only trying to find, really, situations where not B is true and the consequent, E or A and F, is false. So again, if I know the consequent is true, I don't even have to look over at the other column. I can just say true. Consequence false. As long as the antecedent is false, this is still true. False, here we go. Antecedent is true, consequent is false. That's no good. There it happens again. Right. Otherwise, oh, there it is again. Oh, yeah. Okay. Got that finished. All right, B or E. That's what I need to look at. Oh, so far away. Right? It'll look so far. All right, so complex statement, the disjunction's true as long as one of them's true, or both. So I'm really only, so again, you know, I'm really just sort of start by looking at one column and just looking at the B column. And as long as at least B is true, I don't even have to look at E. But then when B is false, then I should look over at the other column. And of course, by starting this way, right, by starting with the B column, I know that I get 4 true, and then 4 false, and then 4 true, and then 4 false. So I have a little system for myself. So 4 true, so I'll just put in true. Then for the next 4, I'm going to look at this column instead. Right? And I know only when E is true here can I put in true, because I already know just from looking at the pattern that B is false four times in a row. So I've got true, false, true, false. And of course, I've got 4 trues here in a row again, so I'll just go 4 trues. Now starting here, right, this row, I'm going to look here again, and look at that, and I alternate, right? I got true, false, which is exactly what I'm going to wind up having. And then I've got B is true 4 times again, and then I've got, what do you know, same pattern, true, false, true, false. Look at that. So that's all done. And then finally, I've got F or B or E. Now here's B or E, I've got that right there. So this time I need to go pay attention to the F column instead. All right. So the conclusion, F or B or E, that is really true if you look at it when any of those simple statements are true. Right? Because we have a disjunction within a disjunction, and of course a disjunction is true, and as long as one disjunct is true. So this disjunction F or B or E is true when F is true, or when B or E is true. And B or E is true when either B or E is true, or both of them. So this statement, F or B or V, is only false when all F, B, and E are false. So of course I could look at all those simple statement columns, but that's a lot of looking. So instead I'll look at the column we just constructed, B or E, and the F column. And for the sake of ease, I'm going to start by looking at the column we just made, because like I said, I know that as long as this statement is true, B or E, the larger statement is also true. So I'm only going to go look at the F column and spend the time looking that far when I don't see true in this nearby column. Right? See, I got a lot of true in this column anyway, so it's pretty easy. Here, I've got a false in that column, so I actually have to go look over at F, but F's true there as well. I've got true, and then, oh, here I've got a false again, so what's going on over in the F row? I've actually got two false. Now I've got true in this column, or this row here, right? The rows of this column, those are all true. So now I've got to actually look. I've got false over here, but a true over there, true. There we go. They're both false in that one. Of course, these are all true again. I've got true. I'll tell you what, I'm just to save myself a bit of time, I'm going to do all the trues and then just take a look at all the falses. So I've got true over here in the F column. So even though I've got a false over there, I've got at least one true. But this is going to be a false one. Yeah, I got false in both columns, so that's going to be false. Down here, I've got true over here and false over there. So still true because at least one's true. And the very last one, I've got false and false. So false. Whew. Okay. So, done with that. So here's the table. Oh, that's not nice. That's really bad. It's good. Look at all the work we just did, but whew, that's a lot of information. What do I have here? I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 columns times 32 rows is 480 cells. Right? So we just filled in 480 cells, assuming I did all that math right. Assuming the calculator I just used did all that math right. So, what are we going to do with this thing now, this monstrosity? Well, as always, what are we trying to do? Find one row where the conclusion is false and all the premises are true. Now, there's a lot of rows where the conclusion is actually true. So let's just focus our attention, and you know what? I'm going to use the highlighter this time. Let's just focus our attention where the conclusion is false. Of course, the conclusion is only in this last row. Wow, look at that. For all of the rows, for all the 32 rows we just made, I only have 4 rows that I have to look at to see if this argument's valid or not. I get to ignore the other 28 rows, which of course, you might be sitting there saying, so why did we make all the rows? And in fact, I'm sitting here saying the same thing. Why did I make all these rows? I shouldn't have done the long truth table. I should have just done the short one. We'll do that right after to see how it works. And I realize now that this video is going well over time. I hope it's still helpful. You can choose to stop watching whenever you want. Like I said, this is more complex than what I'm going to ask you to do on the final exam. But if you can follow this, if you can understand what's going on here, this is a really good way to feel confident that you know what you need to know to do well on the final. All right, so I only have these 4 rows, and I'm just going to work starting with premise 3 because it's closest to the conclusion, and then moving over to premise 2 and premise 1. Just physical distance in this case is really what I'm doing. You could work through, go premise 1, 2, 3, use whatever system you want. All that we're looking for is a row where the conclusion is false and all the premises are true. So in this row, whatever row it is, 8 maybe, I don't know, premise 3 is false. So I don't even have to look at the rest of the row. Okay, at least one premise is false. Down here, we also have a false premise. Here's a false premise. There's a false premise. Look at that. In all 4 of those rows where the conclusion was false, we had a false premise. I don't even have to worry about the rest of the table. It's just knowing this information right here tells me what I need to know. But of course, I don't get that ahead of time. I can't tell ahead of time if I need any of the other rows, which is why I make them. So this argument is valid in every row where conclusion is false. At least one premise is always false, right? Turns out it happens to be premise 3 all the time, but hey, whatever. Doesn't matter which premise it is. Doesn't matter how many rows we have to check. All that matters is that every row where we found the conclusion to be false, at least one premise was false as well. Hopefully I didn't make a mistake with all of the information I had to put in on that stupid table. So now let's go ahead. I want to take my usual shortcut, copy and paste the header row just to make it easier on myself. Of course, this time we're going to do the short truth table method. This should be an excellent demonstration of how the short truth table method can save you a heck of a lot of time. We start by making our conclusion false, right? That's how we always start here. So we say our conclusion's false. Let's stick in some shading too. Conclusion's false. I already talked about this. We have a disjunction. Whenever a disjunction's false, we know both disjuncts are false. So in this case, that tells us that F is false and B or E is false. So where's B or E? Here it is on the table. When B or E is false, we have a disjunction again. That means I know that B and E are both false. Right? They have to be if the disjunction's false. So look at that. Just by making the conclusion false, we got to fill in 4 other cells. Right? And there's only one way this conclusion could be false. So guess what? We need one and only one row. We're saving ourselves constructing 32 rows by using the short method. So the conclusion's false. That tells me that F is false, B or E is false. And of course, that means B and E are both false. So now what do? Well, just look at the premises. That's what we're doing next, right? All these other values, all these other columns we have them because we're going to be filling in more values to figure out how the complex statements are true or false based on the truth values of simple statements. But all we're doing now is trying to settle the premises to true. And we work in increasing order of complexity. So let's see, do we have any simple statements that act as premises? No. Negated simple statements? No. Do we have any conjunctions? No. Do we have any negated disjunctions or implication statements? Because when they're negated, that tells us there's only one set of truth conditions, right? It's telling us either both disjuncts are false or it's telling us the antecedent's true or the consequence false. We don't have that either. So in some sense, we're left on our own here. We have to try to set all 3 premises to true while the conclusion's false without contradicting ourselves. But we don't have a really good guide to go on. So let me look around. What do I have? So premise 1 is telling me it can't be the case that both R and A are true. But of course, that doesn't tell me what the values of R and A actually are. I don't know if they're both false or if one's true or if the other one's true. And I don't have R and A filled in yet. So I'm going to skip that premise for now because, of course, look, I could say this is true, and then I would just have to make up some values over here. Right? But I'm not sure what those values are, and that might pose a problem for me. So I'm going to leave that for now. What about this one? If A, then B or F. Well, do I have B or F here? Well, I don't have B or F set yet. But if I actually look back here, if I go back to the simple statements, both B and F are false. Hey, I actually have more information than I thought I did. I can fill in another truth value here. I know B and F is false, right? It's based on what I already have. I also know, now that I'm looking at it, so I said B's false. When B's false, not B is true. What else? Is there anything else I can fill in? A and F. That's only true when A and F are true. Now, I don't know if A is true, but I know F is false. So I know A and F must be false. Do I have more information? Okay, A and F is false. I just figured that out because I know F is false, and A and F can only be true if both A and F are true. What about this disjunction? I've got the information for that one too. E or A and F. A and F is false. What about E? E is false. Both disjuncts are false, so that disjunction is false too. Hey, I've got a lot more information than I thought I did. This changes everything. Let's look again. I still don't know if R and A are true, but I've got a heck of a lot more information than I used to. All right? Let's look at premise 3. I've got not B, right? If not B, then E or A and F. I've got not B here, and that's true. I've got E, or, and F here, and it's false. Wait, look at that. Premise 3 has to be false. Look, see? The antecedent is true, not B is true. The consequent E, or, A, and F is false. An implication statement's false when the consequent's true and the antecedent is true and the consequent's false. So I know just from setting that conclusion to false and then just sort of following the breadcrumb trail, filling in values as I had them, premise 3 must be false. If that conclusion's false, premise 3 must be false. So the argument is valid, right? Because as soon as the conclusion's false, it takes me a little bit of work to get there, but premise 3 winds up being false. So what about premise 1 and premise 2? Well, look, for the sake of completion, I'll fill it in. I don't have to anymore, right? Just by doing this, I know that the argument is valid. I can't have all the premises be true. Could I make them be true? Let's see, if A, then B or F, right? B or F is false. So let's make premise 2 true. Premise 2 is true, and the consequent is false. I have to make the antecedent false as well, right? Because if the consequent is false, the antecedent has to be false. Otherwise, you've got a contradiction, because when the implication is true, we're just saying it can't be the case that the antecedent's true or the consequent's false. Okay, so I filled in A. I needed to make A false to make P2 true. What about R and A? Well, now I've got A, so I know that R and A must be false because A was false. Premise 1, not R and A. Well, I've got that. That's true now, right? So I could fill that in as true. I could, look, R could be true. R could also be false. Nothing really makes me make it one way or the other, right? I'm free to put that value as I feel, like whatever I want it to be. Because I know if F is false, then R and A is going to be false, which is what premise 1 was. So look at that. This argument is valid. If the conclusion is false, then premise 3 must also be false unless we contradict ourselves. Look at that. So we only made one row. We saved ourselves a heck of a lot of time and a lot of possible error just filling in the cell values up top. Of course, we open ourselves up to a different kind of error here because we have to sort of do a lot of mental logic, looking around saying, okay, well, if that's true, then this is going to be false. And if that's false, then this other thing's true, and sort of following all of those relations. Look at that. Okay. I still have 2 examples. So look, I know I am well over time here. What am I up to? Hour and a quarter. Oh boy, I don't know what I did. I'm going to do the last 2. I'm only going to do the short method for the sake of time. Also, I just don't really feel like making one of those giant tables again. So this is just more example, more demonstration. We'll do just the short tables to see what we come up with. So again, let's start with columns for every simple statement. So I've got A, R, Q, L, B. So I think I need 5. And in fact, rather than start with A, because I know I need a negation for A, so I'll start with R, and then I'm going to go Q, and then I'm going to go L, B, A over here. When I need a column for, just sort of looking at what I have, I know I'm going to need not A. I know I'm going to also need, oh boy, Q or L. So I'm just looking at premise 1 right now. What all do I need to make up premise 1? Well, I need not A, I need Q or L, I need R and Q or L. Then ultimately I'm going to have not A, right? If not A, well, then R and Q or L. That's premise 1. What else do I need? I need, this premise 2 isn't so bad, B or A. Premise 3, B and Q. Conclusion is just R. Oh, look at that. The conclusion is my very first column. All right. I'm only doing the short method, just for the sake of time. So let's see. R. I want the conclusion to be false. Look at it. It's a simple statement. I only have one row. Perfect. That's great. So does knowing that R is false give me enough information to fill in any other value? Well, it doesn't tell me anything about the simple statements. It doesn't tell me anything about this negation. I don't see R show up there. R shows up here. R and Q or L. That has to be false because R is false. One conjunct is false, so that conjunction is false. Does that give me any information? Let's see. R. I don't see R over there, so that doesn't matter. That conjunction, I know that's false because R is false. I got the disjunction in there too, but because the conjunction is out here, ultimately I'm wondering if the conjunction is true or not. And the conjuncts are R, but that's false, so I know the conjunction is false. The other one's Q or L. So Q or L might be true, might be false. I don't know about Q, the actual values for Q and L yet. What about the implication statement? I know the, oh, and I just realized I have a typo there. Oh, all right, I'll double click, bring it back. Let's see, I know the consequent is false, right? R and Q or L is false. And I want premise one to be true. So if the implication statement, if not A, then R and Q or L, right? For that to be true, I've got a false consequent, so the antecedent must be false as well, right? Because if not A was true, then what would I have? A contradiction. Because I'm saying if not A is true, then it must be true that R and Q or L is true. But I know R and Q or L is false, so I know not A must be false. And when not A is false, then A is true. Okay, I've got more information on my hands now, right? Just from that. What else can I do with this? What does A or not A tell me? Well, let's see. Q or L, nothing there. I already know that. I already know these truth values, so I don't really care. B or A. Ah, I know A is true, so premise 2 is true. B or A is true, as long as A is true. Now, can I fill in B? Not with certainty, right? I know that B or A is true because I know A is true, but I don't yet know if B should be true or false. I'm not sure if that's going to have any kind of implication somewhere else, so let's just wait. We'll leave it open. I don't need to set that value yet. Premise 3, B and Q. Let's try this. I honestly don't know if this argument's valid or not. Premise 3, B and Q. I want that to be true. I can make that true so long as I can make B and Q true without a contradiction. Look at this. I haven't set those values yet. I can say B is true this time. I can say Q is true. Look at this. Okay, I've got a false conclusion. All right. R is false. All three premises are true, and let's just work our way back through them. And I know I sort of went out of order here. I was trying to, in a sense, follow the information I had and looking around to see what it was telling me. Right? That's really that's what's underlying the steps I gave you. And if you follow those steps, you really have the best way of getting more information to fill in more values. So let's see, premise 3, B and Q are true. So Q is true, B is true, great, that makes premise 3 true. Premise 2 is true if B or A is true. Both B and A are true, so premise 2 is true, good, no contradiction. Premise 1, this is true so long as, right, as long as the antecedent, not A, is false, this is true, no matter what the consequent is. Not A is false, right? A is true, no contradiction. And of course, the consequent, well, that's false, right? I don't even really need to know that to be sure here, but consequent's false, so if my antecedent and consequent are false, the implication statement's true, right? My conclusion's false. There's no contradiction between R being false here and anything else I've said. So what do I have? Right? Oh, another argument sneaking up. This argument is invalid. In this row, all three premises are true, while the conclusion is false. There's no contradiction. If I spell that right. Now, of course, you might be wondering, Why didn't we set values for Q or L? Didn't need to, right? Just didn't need to determine whether or not those were true or false. The conclusion's false, all the premises are true, right? We got what we needed without setting those values. Now we could, right? So look, we know R and Q or L is false because R is false. So look, this could be true or false, right? You don't actually do this when you're filling in a table, but I'm just going to put it this way. Look, this could be true or false. This remains false. As long as R is false, this statement is false. And so long as this statement is false, right, it was the consequent of the implication, then we know that the implication can be true so long as the antecedent is false. So it really just doesn't matter whether or not Q or L is true, right? It's embedded so far in here. We've got this other conjunct and we know it's false, so we just don't really need to know what that is. So when we look at this, so Q or L could be true or false. Q is true, right? So in fact, we've got the information. Now that we know Q is true, we know that Q or L is actually true. So I could fill that in here. What about L? That's the one that really just doesn't matter. L could be true or false, and it just doesn't make any difference to anything else on this whole table, right? Q or L is true no matter what. I just don't have the information to decide if L really needs to be true or false, so I'll just leave it open, right? It's just a free variable. It can be whatever it wants to be. All right, one last argument, and then I promise I will end this video. All right, what do we have for simple statements? D, E, S, K, R, T, J. Oh, come on. What are you doing, Carl? All right, so I'm going to be honest. I love this. This is wonderful. It's like a puzzle that I can do. I find puzzles very frustrating normally because there's, I don't know, I guess it's because they're this visual thing and there's just kind of picture and you got to take the little pieces and put them together. And I've already mentioned this in class and in previous videos. I don't do well with images and pictures and things. It's not that I don't like them. I just don't process them very well. Truth table I can do, right? There's a nice procedure, there's a correct result. I'm not sort of groping around trying to find the right piece. I know what to do. Okay, so let's try to make this header row. This is going to be a pain. So I know I need one for D, one for E, one for S, one for K, one for R, one for T, one for J. I think that's it. What order am I going to put them in? Well, I know I need, I'm going to add in a couple rows here. I know I need a not K row. Oh, I don't know what that is. I know I need a not K. I know I need a not R. Just looking over at the rest of it. So what else do I need? Well, S. I know I need something for D. I know I need something for E. I know I need something for, oh, I've got K and R over there. I need one for J and one for T. Okay, so I've got all that. What else do I need? Let's put in, because biconditional, and stick it right there. What else do I need? D or, I know I need D or V. I need D or V and S. There's premise one. I finally have a premise on this thing. Oh, K or not R. That was a premise as well. What else do I need? I need T and J. It's going to have its own column because then I also have T and J and not K. That's 3, and then I have R and T, and that's the conclusion. Okay, I think I've got all of the moving pieces here. Let's add in our row here again, just doing short truth table. It's going to save me an awful lot of work. Do I have everything I need? I believe I've got all the simple statements, right? Got the complex statements. So just looking through each premise, okay, I've got premise 1, D or V and S. Of course, I've got D or E, I need that, right? I've also got something for S, so I've got premise 1, premise 2, K biconditional not R, I've got that here. I've also got a not R column, I've got a K column, so that's good. Premise 1, or premise 3, my apologies, T and J and not K, so I need something for T and J, and I need a not K. And then finally R and T, and I've got that, and of course I've got the R and T columns. Good. All right, so I need R and T to be false, right? Start by setting our conclusion to false. What does that tell us? It tells us R and T can't be true. Does that tell me the truth values for R and T, though? Think about it for a second. No, it doesn't, right? Because R and T is only true when both R and T are true at the same time. So if this statement were true, we would know that the R over here is true and T is true. But R and T is false so long as one of them is false, right? So this could be the case when they're both false. Or, you know, as long as one or both of them is false, the conclusion's false. So I know it's going to be some combination like that, but I don't yet know which one it is. So in this short truth table, I actually might have up to 3 rows. Now, you don't have to do this. You can just make them one at a time, right? But I can do it this way. I can say, look, I know I have these 3 possible rows. So I'm going to go ahead and try to do them in order. I'll try each one of them. But these are the 3 combinations I have, right? These are the 3 ways that conclusion can be false. So I'm going to try them. So I've stuck this in, right? You don't have to. You could just sort of start with one row and then build the others when you need to. I'm going to leave these here just to show you. These are our 3 attempts. I'm just going to try this first one. Now, is this the best order for me to go in? Do I have any sort of like hidden, you know, pedagogy here? Like, oh, we're going to start with a way that doesn't work and then we'll move on to another. I don't know. I don't think I've tried this argument before. This is something I threw together, right? This could represent any argument of this form. We can fill in any statements we want for the simple statements. If the argument has this kind of form, we're going to know if it's valid or not. Okay, so starting in this first row, the conclusion that conjunction's false. So I've just said, okay, let's make both conjuncts false. R is false and T is false, and let's just see what happens. Based on this information, what else can I fill in? Nothing about the other simple statements, but here's not R. I know not R has to be true because R is false. I've also got T. I don't have a not T, so I can't do anything with that. Looking around, what else do I have? Not K. I don't know about K yet. K or not R. I know not R is true, but I don't yet know if K is true or false, so I'm not sure here. D or E. Don't have either of those values, so I don't know. D or E and S. I don't have S, I don't have D or E, so I can't say anything there. T and J. Ah, this is false, because T is false, T and J is false, right? One of the conjuncts is false, so it's false. Ooh, here's something. T and J and not K. Brr. I know that's false. Why? Because T and J is false, right? And what do we have here? We've got a conjunction in the middle. So premise 3 is telling us both conjuncts are true. One of those conjuncts is T and J. T and J is only true when both T and J are true, right? I've already determined that that's false because I know T is false. Great, look, I'm done. I'm done with this row. Just by making the conclusion false, I then arbitrarily chose to make both T and R false, right? Because those were the conjuncts. This is one, having both of them false is one way the conclusion could be false. So I'm not contradicting myself, although I am in some sense making things up a little bit. I'm not sure if T and J are, or T and R are false when the conclusion's false, but they could be. And that's what I'm starting with. I'm starting with what could be the case. And just from that, and then filling in a few other values, I found out that premise 3 is false. So with the conclusion false in this way, premise 3 was false pretty quick. And I'm just going to leave all the rest of the values open. I don't care. I just know premise 3 was false. So when the conclusion's false in this way, premise 3 winds up being false really quick. And as long as one of the premises is false, well, the conclusion's false, the row doesn't show us invalidity. That in that row, the argument's still valid, or at least potentially valid. So let's move on to this next row. Now, there is actually, I did not plan this, but there's sort of like a little hidden lesson here. So in that previous row, I made both T and R false. And then because T was false, T and J was false. And because T and J was false, T and J and not K was false. This time, T is true, right? T is true in this instance. So what about T and J? Well, I don't know if that's true or false yet, but I know it's not going to force P3 to be false in the same way. P3 wound up being false last time because T was false. I'm not going to get that this time. Well, let's still work in order. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. So what else can I fill in? Well, I've got R is false, so not R is true again. What else can I fill in? T is true. I don't know. I don't know anything about not K. I don't know about this biconditional yet. I don't know anything about D or E. I don't know anything about D or S. T and J. I don't know about J. So I can't say that's true yet, but it might be true. I don't know that it's false the way I knew it was false in the first row. And then I've got this premise. Okay, so I don't have enough information just based on the conclusion being false to really fill in anything else in this row. So what am I going to do? Try to start making all the premises true. Thinking back to that list I have in chapter 6, can we really do anything with the list? No simple statements. No negated simple statements. All right. What about a conjunction? Hey, premise 1 and premise 3 are both conjunctions. Now they've got conjuncts that are complex statements as well, right? Premise 1 has D or E as a conjunct. Premise 3 has T and J and not K as a conjunct. So there's a little bit of a decision here, right? I've got two conjunctions. I want to make them true. Does it matter which order I go in? In one way, not really, right? I could make premise 1 true and see what happens, or premise 3 true, see what happens. I'm going to opt for premise 3. Why? Because the conjunct that acts as a complex statement is itself another conjunction. So I know if premise 3 is true, I know that the conjunction here is true. I know that not K is true. That's one conjunct, right? Not K is true, and as soon as I know that not K is true, I know K is false. The other conjunct is T and J, right? So by saying premise 3 is true, I'm also saying T and J is true. And by saying T and J is true, I'm saying T is true, which I already knew. I'm also saying J is true. Look at all that information I just got. Wonderful. No contradiction so far. So far, so good. We're on our way. We've got two more premises. Let's go with premise 1 this time. It's another conjunction, right? D or E and S. We'll say that's true. Again, we know both conjuncts must be true, so I know S is true this time. That's one conjunct. Nice simple statement, easy to handle. The other conjunct, D or E. Well, I've got a column for D or E, so I'll fill that in. D or E is true. Great. Now, I don't have the simple statement values filled in yet, D or E. I know that they can't both be false based on the fact that I just said D or E is true. So these could be, they could be both true, they could be true, false. I'm not really sure yet. So let me look around. Is there more information I have here? Is anything else going to tell me if D or E has to be true based on what's left? Well, I only actually have one premise left. I have premise 2. It's, K biconditional R. Oh, look at this. I already have the information for that, right? I don't even, look at this. I'm not sure when I even got that information. I think it was a little while ago, actually. I think it was probably when I did this other one. I just didn't even notice I had the information I needed to fill this in yet. K biconditional, not R. I have to look at the K column and the not R column. Uh-oh. K is false, well, not R is true, and the biconditional tells us that they have to both be true or false at the same time. So I actually know that premise 2 is false this time. Well, darn, look at that. Now I'm just gonna put my tools down here. I still haven't filled in D or E. I don't need to, because somewhere along the way, I don't even remember it now, right? I filled in the values for K, and I filled in the values for not R, and the values just didn't add up to what I needed them to add up to say that this premise was true. In fact, if I just sort of think back to what I was doing, when did I get that information? In P3, filled in, said not K was true. When was R true? Oh, and right, I already had R just from the outset. See, so I didn't even notice that I had the information I needed. Maybe a bad example to be setting, but really I'm just trying to show that what we do here when we're doing, say, a short truth table, we're trying to work through it and really see, as we're filling in values in one spot, how do they carry over to other spots. So I probably should have been a little bit more careful. Maybe this is a bad example to set, but I'm trying to show you how you can actually work through it. You don't necessarily have to stick to that rigid set of rules. But if you do stick to them, that's a very good way to approach these things that will minimize the chance of making a mistake somewhere. Okay, last column. So here again, we ended up with a false premise, so we couldn't show invalidity. So I've got one attempt left, just one, right? The third row, R and T can be false in this third way when T is false but R is true. So we tried when they're both false. We tried when T was true and R was false. Now we'll try when T is false and R is true. So what does this tell us? Well, if R is true, not R is false, right? Look back over here, T and J, oh, I have a familiar pattern. T is false, so T and J is false. And if T and J is false, then premise 3 that takes T and J as a conjunct is false. I'm done. I'm finished this row. I know just from the conclusion being false this way, as soon as T is false, T and J is false. As soon as T and J is false, the third premise is false. So what do I have here? What have I shown? This argument is valid. Right? I didn't know that going into it. I had no idea. This argument is valid. In each row where the conclusion is false, at least one premise is always false. There are no contradictions in any row, right? Every row, at least when premise is false, when the conclusion is false, that shows us the argument's valid. And there just aren't any other ways to make that conclusion false. I actually want to redo row 2. And then I swear, I'm going to stop this video. I'm going to put the tools down. It's been, what, an hour 40 now. This is a very long one. Sorry. Let's just do this again. I just want to see what happens. So R and T, I know that's going to be false. So we've got R and T, so we've got false, also true, false. That's what this row was, right? That's a different way of making that conclusion false than the first or last rows do. All right. So I know just from R being false, not R is true. Look around. Do I have information to set anything else? No, I don't believe so. And so this is where I started. I just said, okay, let's start by making premise 3 true because it's a conjunction with a conjunction, so it gives me a lot of information. When you set a conjunction to true, you get a lot of information. You know, a lot of other things must be true. So I know not K is true, which means K is false. I know that T is true, which I already have here. I know that J must be true, so fill in J. What else? Okay, so that's true. Oh, this is where I already had the information. This is what I didn't notice last time, and I went on and was filling in premise 1. I didn't even need to do that, just based on the information I have. So whenever you've got the information to fill in another value, just do it. So in this case, what I didn't realize last time is that I already had the information to fill in this cell, premise 2, K biconditional, not R. So that biconditional is only true when they're both true or both false. K is false, not R is true, which makes the biconditional false, right? So look at that. I don't even have to worry about premise 1 because I know premise 2 has to be false as long as I'm being consistent in assigning the truth values the way I've done here. So based on the conclusion being false, I filled in somewhat arbitrarily the truth values for R and T, which made up the conclusion, right? It's not fully arbitrary because the RT values, what I've tried to do is fill them in the 3 possible combinations that reflect the 3 ways R and T can be false. And in this second instance, right, just based on that, I had enough information to fill in not R. Then I just went to premise 3. I made it true, right? I didn't have enough information to fill in anything else. So you just start making premises true. We have to make them all true. Well, the conclusion's false to get the result we want. So I made that true, and just based on that, that gave me a bunch of information. Based on all that other information, I could conclude that premise 2 was false, based on what I had filled in the K and not R columns. Look at that. Okay, I'm finally going to stop. I hope this video has been helpful in seeing how we can use both the long and the short truth table methods to work through some complex arguments. So in the previous videos, we were dealing largely with simpler arguments. I've tried to put in some arguments that had some brackets and things like that as well. What we did in this video is quite a bit more complex than anything we did earlier. So if you got a little bit lost in this video, that's okay. Don't let that shake your confidence too much. Like I said, I made these arguments up before I made the video. I probably put the dial up a little too high. You know, there's a lot of columns here. There's a lot of statements. There's a heck of a lot going on in this argument. And up above, you know, the previous arguments here were pretty complicated. This table is monstrous. So if there's one lesson to be learned out of this whole video, I'm not going to make you do this, right? I'm not going to make you do this thing on the final exam and have hundreds of cells. It's not going to be that bad. So if you got a little bit lost in this video, don't worry too much. If you followed along for the most part, or if you even followed along for the whole thing, if you watched this video and you saw what I was doing, you saw the steps we were taking, and you could sort of follow along and say, okay, I know why we're doing that now, and I know why we're doing that now, and I know why we're doing that now. Being able to follow it in that way alone is enough to tell you you're on the right track, right? This stuff gets very complicated. That's part of what I wanted to show you with an argument like this. It gets to be a lot of information. It gets to be very complicated. But we can understand all that complexity just by mastering the basic tools of statement logic. By taking something complex like this, cutting it up into the simple statements and understanding how those simple statements fit together with just those 5 basic operators, we can interpret complex information like this in a way that we can be certain about whether or not that argument form is valid or not. Once we know that, right, we can then just focus our efforts when we're actually trying to deal with an argument, trying to figure out whether or not we should accept the conclusion of the argument. We can then just focus on determining whether or not we actually think the premises of the argument are true or false, right? If we actually had simple statements that were natural language statements telling us something about the world we live in, right, something conceptually, whatever it was, we would be able to look at that information and just cut it down to, okay, premise 1, do we really know, say, that it's false that R and A are both true? Premise 2, do we know that if A is true, that B or F has to be true? Premise 3, do we know that if B is false, then either E is true or A and F is true, right? And we'll know, based on whether or not the argument was valid, that the conclusion will have to follow from the truth of the premises. So what we have is this great complexity, and you can comprehend it through acts of analysis, cutting those complex things into little simple things, and then seeing how they stick together, right? And then looking for these sorts of patterns, doing this kind of analytical work, seeing how these things all add up to that complexity again. Break it down into its little parts and put it all back together, right? Do that act of analysis, breaking apart, that synthesis, pulling it back together, and you can do an awful lot. You've got very sophisticated reasoning powers up here as a human being, right? Doing what we're doing in this course, it can be pretty abstract, it can be difficult, but if you work at this, right, no matter how you do in the course, right, no matter how confusing this seems, if you put in some time and energy and you really practice, not only this formal logic stuff, but you practice everything else we've been doing. You think about arguments, you think about argument forms, abstract away a little bit from the particular contents to think about what kind of form an argument has, what makes that kind of argument strong or weak. You do that kind of interpretive work, you ask good questions, right? You try to be charitable in your interpretations, try to figure out what people are really trying to say, right? How's that argument really supposed to work? What are the premises? What is the conclusion? What kind of argument is this? What makes that kind of argument strong or weak? What makes an argument generally a strong argument or a weak one? If you practice these, and it takes work, and it takes time to really get comfortable with this way of thinking. It is a skill, right? It's like playing a musical instrument or doing anything else, or getting good at mathematics or art or dance, or you name it. Reasoning in this way is a complex skill, and like many complex skills, it takes a lot of time and energy to get good at it. As you get good at it, you'll be a more sophisticated reasoner, and you'll be a more independent reasoner. You can rely on your own judgments instead of relying on the judgments of other people. And if there's anything worthwhile in this life, I think intellectual independence is certainly one of those things. I really hope that this course has helped foster that in you, that we've developed skills over time, that I've presented this information as clearly as possible in an accessible way, hopefully a way that's also at least a little bit exciting. I really hope you've enjoyed our course. I've enjoyed being your instructor through this immensely. I wish you all the very best of luck, both on our final exam, on all your final exams and projects, as well as moving forward with your lives, wherever you wind up or whatever you study, whatever you do. I wish each and every one of you the absolute best moving forward. Until we meet again, bye for now.